They gave him a paralyzed bride as a burden, but the native warrior loved her like no other. The prairie morning stretched wide and quiet, the sky a pale gold that softened the scars of the land. Vikasa Red Moon, a native man with a long black braid, a tan frontier shirt, and worn leather trousers, stood outside the old cabin he called home. His figure, tall and hardened by years of sun and hardship, looked carved from the same earth he walked on. Only his eyes betrayed him, dark, restless, carrying storms that never quite passed. 2 summers ago, a single moment had shattered his life. A raid. A panic he couldn't explain. A friend dying because Vikasa's legs had locked beneath him. He'd carried that guilt like a stone in his chest ever since. Clearwater had once welcomed him. He traded pelts, guided settlers through rough country, and mended fences for neighbors who once trusted him. But now their eyes slid away like he was made of smoke. Still, he walked into town that morning. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind, more like the silence before a branch snaps. When he pushed open the door to Murphy's saloon, all conversation dropped. Men hunched over their drinks, avoiding his gaze. Vikasa moved with calm dignity, though the tension cut into him like a cold wind. Grant Pierce, thick-shouldered and bitter with grief, stood from a corner table. His chair scraped the floor like a threat. "Well, look who crawled out of his hole," Grant snarled. Vikasa Red Moon, the mighty warrior who froze while my cousin bled out. Vikasa's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "I carry that day every sunrise." Grant spat onto the floor. "Caring ain't the same as paying." He shoved Vikasa hard in the chest. The saloon held its breath. Murphy stepped forward, but Grant shook him off and whispered fiercely, "Say something. Say you weren't a coward." Vikasa lifted his steady gaze. "I wish I could trade places with him," he said. But the spirits chose different. Grant's fist flew fast, fueled by months of hate. Pain exploded across Vikasa's cheek. He didn't hit back. He absorbed it like the earth absorbs lightning, silent, unbroken but scarred. The second punch came harder. Men muttered. Shame prickled the room. Murphy finally grabbed Vikasa's arm. "Go, son, please." Vikasa nodded once. Pride didn't matter anymore. He stepped outside into the bright, uncaring sun. He walked the dirt road back to his cabin east of town. The wind brushed his long braid behind him, almost like a hand offering comfort. His horse, Stormhoof, nickered softly as he approached. "It's just us," Vikasa murmured, pressing his forehead to her warm neck. "And the land." But even the land felt heavy today. He didn't know that by tomorrow morning, a wagon would arrive carrying a woman named Isabel Crane, and with her, the turning of a fate he'd long believed sealed. The dawn rolled in quiet and pale, stretching soft light across the open plains. A native man, Vikasa Red Moon, stepped out of his cabin, brushing his long black braid over his shoulder as the wind tugged at the loose strands. His tan shirt carried the coolness of morning, and the leather of his worn trousers creaked softly as he moved down the porch steps. Stormhoof lifted her head from the grass, ears turning toward the distant road before Vikasa even heard the sound. Wagon wheels. Slow. Heavy, like someone carrying more burden than belongings. Vikasa's chest tightened. Nothing good came in a wagon that early. He stood still, watching the outline grow in the rising sun until he recognized the driver, Henry Crane. The man's face was hardened, already impatient before the conversation even began. The wagon stopped in front of the porch with a long, groaning sigh from its axles. Henry didn't bother with greetings. "You Vikasa Red Moon?" Vikasa nodded once, silent. Henry jerked a thumb behind him. "Well, got your bride here." Vikasa's eyes narrowed. "Bride?" Henry let out an annoyed breath. "My niece. Isabel Crane. Can't walk since the wagon rolled last winter. Folks in town said you'd take her." Vikasa felt something sharp twist inside him, not toward the woman, but toward the cruelty behind the plan. "I said I want to meet her first," he said, voice steady. Henry grumbled but pulled back the canvas anyway. Vikasa felt the breath leave his chest. A young woman lay inside, copper hair spilling around her like fallen leaves, eyes green and guarded. She studied Vikasa with a stillness that spoke of long, painful months where hope had been a stranger. "You're Vikasa?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I am. They told you I can't walk." "Yes," she swallowed. "And you still agree to this?" He hesitated, because he hadn't agreed. No one had asked him or her. But there was no kindness in telling her that. So he answered the only way his heart allowed. I didn't come here to cause you more hurt. Isabel looked away. Then let's just get this over with. The words were tired but not weak. Just worn down from too much surviving. Helping her out of the wagon took time. Vicasa's hands were steady, careful. Her breath trembled every time the wheel of her chair caught. Henry muttered the whole while, as if she were a burden he was relieved to release. When the wheels finally touched the cabin floor, Isabel tried to move herself forward, but the board snagged, jolting her slightly. Vicasa stepped instinctively, but she lifted a hand. I can manage. He paused, then nodded, giving her the space she fought for. Her wheelchair was finally made, clearly once bought with love. But inside this small cabin built for a solitary life, everything felt too tight, too narrow, too unprepared for someone who'd already lost half her world. Henry left without a thank you, without a glance back. Silence filled the cabin like dust settling after a storm. Vicasa stood near the table, unsure of what words could soften a life neither of them had chosen. But deep inside him, something shifted, quiet but unmistakable. This woman deserved dignity. And he would give her that, even if the world hadn't. The morning sun poured through the cabin windows, painting the dust motes in gold. A native man Vicasa Red Moon moved quietly, assessing the space around him. Every corner, every step, every threshold suddenly had new meaning now. It wasn't just his life anymore. Isabel Crane's presence changed the rhythm of the cabin, the pulse of the very walls. She attempted to wheel herself to the counter for coffee, but the tin tipped, scattering the grounds across the floor. Damn it, she muttered, frustrated, cheeks flushing. Vicasa didn't speak. He simply knelt, brushing the coffee back into the tin, letting his hands do what words couldn't yet. This isn't working, she said, her voice carrying the weight of months she'd lived in a body that refused her. Nothing works anymore. Something inside him tightened. Not anger, not shame, but a fierce determination. He stepped outside, gathering rough-hewn boards and tools from the shed, his leather trousers creaking with each movement. The sun cast his long shadow across the yard, a silent promise that he would not let her world remain small. She watched him from the doorway, curiosity softening her guarded eyes. What are you doing? She asked, though she knew it wasn't just a question. You'll see, he said, voice quiet but firm. By evening, a ramp stretched from the porch to the yard. A crude but functional bridge that meant she could move without fear of getting stuck on the warped floorboards. The sweat on his brow, the hammer in his hand, spoke louder than any apology or explanation could. 2 days later, the bathroom door was widened. The sink lowered, chairs rearranged to small but significant victories for a life that had been cruelly limited. Isabel wheeled through the cabin, stopping at each new adjustment, her eyes wide with the quiet disbelief of someone who had begun to hope again. Vicasa worked without fanfare, without complaint, only pausing to check her face for fatigue. She had become the measure of every movement, every decision he made in the cabin. When she finally stopped at the threshold of the window, catching her breath, she turned to him. Why are you doing this? He didn't look up immediately, letting his hammer rest. Finally, he met her gaze. So you can move, so you can live. This isn't just my house anymore, her lips pressed together. You don't owe me anything. I know, he said. And for the first time, there was a warmth in his eyes that went beyond duty or obligation. But this is right. She didn't answer, only wheeled herself toward the light, tracing the horizon outside with her gaze. And for the first time in a long while, the cabin felt a little less like a cage and a little more like home. That night, Vicasa lingered near the door, watching her so quietly under the flickering candlelight. The quiet was not empty, it was full of possibility. He had begun to see her not as someone broken, but as someone remarkable, strong, patient, resilient, and somewhere deep inside a realization took root. This life they had been given by circumstance. Maybe it wasn't just survival anymore. Maybe together they could build something more. Outside, the prairie wind whispered against the cabin, carrying the scent of rain and the unspoken promise of change. Inside, a fire crackled. And for the first time since the wagon, the weight of loneliness began to lift not just for her, but for him. A week later, the sky darkened without warning. Clouds rolled in low across the prairie, heavy and restless. A native man Vicasa was stacking firewood when the first distant rumbles of thunder rolled over the horizon. Isabel, seated by the window, watched the light dim and the wind stir the tall grasses outside. "This one's coming fast," she said, voice steady but quiet. He nodded, eyes narrowing at the horizon. "We'll be ready." The storm arrived suddenly. Rain lashed against the cabin walls. Gusts rattled the windows, and the wind carried a howl that could unsettle even the bravest soul. But inside, the cabin remained a fortress, and Vikasa moved with the calm certainty of someone who had faced far harsher trials. Isabel leaned forward in her chair, gripping the edges as she watched the trees bend in the wind. I can help, can I?" she asked, a flicker of determination in her green eyes. "You already do," he said softly. "Just stay with me." Hours passed. The storm intensified. Lightning split the sky, thunder cracked like rifle shots, and every shadow seemed alive with movement. Then came the sound he had feared most. Hoofbeats in the mud, heavy and deliberate. Someone was approaching. He motioned for her to step back, but she didn't. Instead, she reached beneath the chair, lifting the colt her father had left her, steady in her grasp, despite the chaos outside. "Are you sure?" he whispered. She met his gaze. "I'm not hiding." The door burst inward with a splintering crash. Water and wind followed in, carrying with them 3 men, soaking and sneering. One of them barked his contempt, mocking the cabin, mocking their lives. Vikasa's pulse hammered in his ears, his hand steady on the rifle. Isabel's colt glimmered in the flickering lantern light. Neither flinched. The intruders lunged, assuming they faced easy prey. But together, they were something far more dangerous. Vikasa fired first, 2 shots into the floor, warning and precise. Isabel followed, each shot echoing with calm authority. The intruders staggered back, disbelief painted across their faces. "You'll regret this," one shouted, but the storm drowned his threat. No cinematic standoff, no reckless heroics. Just careful, deliberate defense. Vikasa tackled one, pinning him to the floor, while Isabel rolled her chair to the next, firing again with uncanny precision. Each move reflected trust, coordination, and a silent understanding that neither would leave the other vulnerable. By the time the rain began to ease, the intruders lay defeated or had fled, their arrogance broken. Vikasa lowered the rifle, heart still pounding. Isabel's colt rested across her lap. "You okay?" he asked, kneeling beside her chair. She nodded, pale but unshaken. "Better than okay." "We did it together." For a long moment the cabin was quiet except for the rain dripping from the eaves. Outside, the storm softened to a gentle drizzle. Inside, a deeper calm settled, a realization that they could face the world not as 2 broken souls, but as a united front. Vikasa stood, brushing mud from his trousers. He looked at her, and for the first time, the weight of the past felt lighter. Whatever the prairie threw at them next, they would meet it, together. And somewhere in the distance, a rainbow broke through the thinning clouds, stretching across the horizon like a promise of new beginnings. The storm had passed, leaving the prairie glistening under the soft morning sun. Puddles reflected the wide sky, and the smell of wet earth drifted through the cabin. A native man, Vikasa, leaned against the doorway, watching Isabel as she moved her chair carefully across the wooden floor. Every small motion carried a quiet determination, the kind that came from years of learning to survive. "You've been practicing," he said, voice low, careful not to startle her. She glanced at him, a half-smile tugging at her lips. "A little. Don't want to be caught off guard next time." He nodded, feeling a warmth rise in his chest. This was different from the fear and shame that had plagued him after the raid. This was trust. Partnership, mutual strength. Together, they were no longer fragile or broken, they were formidable. That afternoon, Vikasa took her outside. Dusty, his mare, stood patiently tethered to a post, steam rising from her coat in the cool air. Isabel's eyes widened slightly at the sight, remembering the days before the accident when she had ridden freely, feeling the wind through her hair. I don't know if I can," she admitted, voice trembling. "You can," he said gently. "I'll be right here." Every step, he helped her into a specially designed harness he had been building in secret. Each strap adjusted to hold her securely yet comfortably. Vikasa's hands were steady, his voice calm, and Isabel felt a flicker of courage ignite within her. As he lifted her onto Dusty's back, she gasped. Her perspective had changed. The world was no longer at eye level. It was vast and alive beneath her. "Higher," she whispered, a smile breaking through her nervousness. Vikasa guided Dusty forward, feeling her pulse steady beneath him. With each gentle step, Isabel's confidence grew. She laughed, a sound full of wonder and joy, the first truly free sound in years. Vikasa's heart soared with her. In that moment, he realized that life had finally begun to heal not by erasing the past, but by claiming the present together. Afterwards, they returned to the cabin, muddy boots and all, but glowing with shared accomplishment. Inside, Vikasa showed Isabel the small adjustments he had made over the past week. A lowered counter, rearranged shelves, and carved notches in window handles. "You've done all this for me?" she asked softly, eyes glistening. "Not for you," he replied, kneeling to meet her gaze. "With you. This place is ours now. We make it work together." Isabel's smile deepened, the gratitude and admiration in her eyes clear but unspoken. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden or a project. She was a partner, equal and strong. And Vikasa, he was no longer just a man haunted by cowardice. He was a man capable of bravery, love, and patience. As evening fell, they sat side by side on the porch, Dusty grazing nearby. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, peaceful and forgiving after the storm. Isabel leaned back, letting the warmth of the sunset fill her chest. "We're going to be okay," she said quietly. "Yes," Vikasa replied, his gaze steady on the horizon. "Better than okay." And for the first time since the Apache raid, neither of them felt alone. Together, they had begun to reclaim the life the world had tried to take away. And this was only the beginning. The calm of the prairie was deceptive. A native man, Vikasa sensed it before he saw it, the subtle shift in the wind, the faint sound of hooves pressing against wet earth in the distance. He tightened his grip on Dusty's reins, eyes scanning the horizon. Isabel noticed the tension in his posture. "What is it?" she asked, voice soft but alert. "Trouble," he said simply. "And it's coming this way." Isabel's hands went instinctively to the pistol resting in her lap. But for a heartbeat she froze, the weight of the approaching danger pinning her in the chair. Her pulse raced, her breath caught, and it felt as though the prairie itself had held its breath with her. The peacefulness they had built felt fragile, and in that frozen moment she realized just how easily it could be shattered. Then she blinked, shook herself, and pushed the paralysis aside. The fear was real, but it would not control her. She straightened in her chair, hands steady now, eyes sharp, and prepared to face what was coming. In the distance, a cloud of dust rose over the prairie. 6 men on horseback, familiar yet unwelcome. Buck Morrison led them, flanked by strangers with hard eyes and restless hands hovering near their holsters. Vikasa's jaw tightened, his mind running through the last months, the work, the small victories, the quiet rebuilding. None of that mattered if they lost what they had fought to hold. "They think they can take this from us," he muttered under his breath. Isabel's eyes met his, and for a moment, words weren't necessary. She would not be a victim. He would not run. Together, they were unbreakable. The men dismounted, spitting into the dirt and scowling. Buck's sneer carried the same smug cruelty as before. "Thought you'd hide behind that mare again," he taunted. Vikasa stepped forward, calm but firm. "We're done hiding. You get nothing here." A sudden crack of thunder punctuated the silence, as if the sky itself sided with them. Buck raised his hands mockingly. "We'll see about that." Then the first horseman lunged. Vikasa moved like lightning, stepping into the path, swinging the rifle with precision. Isabel, still seated, found her rhythm, firing with measured accuracy. Each shot was deliberate, each movement confident. She wasn't standing, but her resolve made her just as formidable. Together, they moved as one, unbroken, unyielding. By the time the dust settled, Buck and his men had retreated, leaving the cabin and the small property untouched, but not unscathed. Splintered wood, trampled grass, and a lingering tension remained a reminder that the world outside could still be cruel. Vikasa lowered his rifle, breathing heavy but steady. Isabel's hands shook slightly, but her eyes sparkled with triumph. "We did it," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed, reaching out to steady her. "Together, always." The morning sun spilled golden light across the prairie, painting the cabin in warmth. A native man, Vikasa, stirred first, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the hearth where Isabel had started a small fire. He watched her from the doorway, the way her fingers moved over the pot, careful and precise, and felt a swell of something he hadn't allowed himself to name yet. Pride? Protection? Maybe both. "You're up early," he said softly, stepping inside. Isabel looked up, green eyes catching the sunlight. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted. "Too many thoughts." Vikasa nodded, pulling a chair close. "I know that feeling." He leaned back, studying the way the morning light caught the strands of her hair. She was quiet, but there was a strength in her silence that demanded recognition. She had survived more than most. Yet here she was, rebuilding her life, rebuilding herself. They ate in companionable silence, the rhythm of the cabin and the prairie outside grounding them. Vikasa's gaze lingered on Isabel, imagining the battles she had fought alone, her father's store, the accident, the family that doubted her, the life she'd lost. And yet here she was, facing him as an equal, as a partner. After breakfast, Vikasa stepped outside. Dusty waited patiently, her dark eyes reflecting the morning sky. He ran a hand along her mane, feeling the bond between horse and rider, between him and this place he'd fought so hard to claim. Isabel followed, rolling herself to the gate, eyes on him. "I have an idea," he said, voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Something for today." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you don't like adventure," he replied, a rare, small smile tugging at his lips. By mid-morning, Viksa had constructed a small ramp and harness near the stables, familiar movements but with a careful, thoughtful precision. Isabel watched, curiosity mingled with hesitation. "You're serious about this?" she asked. "Absolutely," he said, brushing her hand as he adjusted the straps. "Life shouldn't be seen from the edge. You deserve the sky, Isabel." Her breath caught. It had been 2 long years since she had felt that kind of freedom, and the thought of it brought tears she refused to shed in front of him. Vikasa's steady presence was enough to anchor her fear. Slowly, carefully, he helped her into the harness, every movement deliberate, every touch gentle. The moment she was lifted, heart racing, Vikasa's hands held hers, guiding her onto Dusty's back. The world stretched before her, rolling hills, waving grass, endless sky. She gasped softly, and then, for the first time in years, she laughed. Pure, unrestrained, like the prairie itself had lent her its freedom. Vikasa mounted behind her, securing a blanket around them both. "Hold on," he said softly. She leaned back against him, letting the rhythm of Dusty's walk carry them forward. Wind whipped against her face, and the sunlight caught her eyes like fire and hope all at once. Vikasa's hands rested lightly on her waist, guiding, protecting, but never restricting. "You're smiling," he said, voice low, almost a whisper. "I feel alive," she admitted. "Like I did before, like I can again." He tightened his grip just slightly, a silent promise. "You will, Isabel. And I'll be right here, every step, every ride, every storm." Together, they moved across the prairie, no words needed, no past heavy enough to weigh them down. For the first time, the horizon belonged not to fear, but to hope. And in that shared silence they both understood, the future was theirs to claim together. The sky darkened late that afternoon, clouds rolling in fast across the prairie. A native man, Vikasa and Isabel, had been working together on the small cabin garden, laughing quietly as they planted herbs and flowers. It was a rare moment of peace, the kind that felt fragile, like a candle flickering against the wind. Vikasa wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at Isabel. "You're doing better than you realize," he said. "I thought today might be tough, but look at you. You're steady," she smiled, brushing dirt from her hands, then eased herself onto a sturdy wooden chair near the porch, keeping her father's Colt in her lap. "It's easier when someone believes you can," she said, her gaze softening as it lingered on him. The calm shattered suddenly. The sound of hooves pounding against the dirt reached them before the figures emerged from the stormy haze. 6 men rode fast, faces masked with rain and malice. Vikasa's hands tightened instinctively on the fence post. "Looks like trouble," he muttered, eyes scanning the riders. Isabel, seated in her chair, followed his gaze. Her posture was steady, unafraid. She had learned, through fire and fear, that standing firm mattered more than trembling in the shadow of danger. Vikasa, she said, voice low but steady. We can handle this. Together. He nodded, pride mingling with relief. There was no hesitation in her eyes, only resolve. The chair beneath her didn't make her any less dangerous, it grounded her, gave her a stable base to act from. The riders approached, their leader spitting into the mud before sneering. Morning, folks, he called. Time to pay your dues. You've been living too free out here. Vikasa stepped forward, rifle in hand. Isabel, seated but ready, raised the Colt, finger poised. We don't pay. We don't leave. Not today, Vikasa said, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. A tense silence followed. The rain fell harder, drumming on the cabin roof, mixing with the low rumble of distant thunder. Dusty nickered from the barn, and Vikasa felt the strength of the land beneath his boots, steady and unyielding. One of the men charged, thinking fear would slow them, but Isabel fired from her chair, the shot striking the ground before the intruder could reach them. Vikasa followed, precise and controlled, his movements fluid, a dance born of years living close to the land and its dangers. The standoff escalated quickly. Riders hesitated, misjudging the fire in these two who refused to be prey. Vikasa moved like water, covering her while she adjusted her chair slightly, bringing the Colt to bear with sharp, accurate shots. Their unity was seamless, forged through trust and countless small victories over fear and doubt. By the time the last rider bolted into the rain, both Vikasa and Isabel were soaked, muddy, and breathing heavily, yet standing, or in Isabel's case, seated tall, proud, and unbroken. The storm outside mirrored the adrenaline within them, but inside an unspoken understanding settled. They were stronger than anyone had given them credit for, individually, but unstoppable together. Vikasa lowered his rifle, stepping closer. Are you hurt? He asked, voice soft, almost afraid of breaking the fragile calm. She shook her head, a small scratch marred her cheek. Nothing serious, she said, brushing rain-soaked hair from her eyes. We survived, together. He reached for her hand, resting his over hers on the chair. Always together, he promised. The rain softened, sun piercing through the clouds in golden streaks. And in that light, Isabel stayed seated, grounded and strong, sharing the quiet triumph with Vikasa. They had faced the storm, and it had only made them stronger together, unbroken, ready for whatever came next. Morning light filtered through the rain-soaked trees, casting long shadows across the prairie. A native man, Vikasa, stood on the cabin porch, eyes scanning the glistening earth, feeling the quiet strength of the land beneath his boots. Isabel was seated in a sturdy wooden chair beside him, one hand resting on the arm, the other holding a letter with edges damp from the lingering drizzle. It was from her cousin in Omaha, offering a chance to return home, reclaim her family's store, and step back into the life she had lost. Money, safety, comfort, everything the world said she deserved. But stepping back into that life meant leaving Vikasa, the man who had helped her discover strength she didn't know she still had. Vikasa noticed the hesitation in her eyes before she spoke. You're thinking about going back, he said softly, his hand brushing the rain from the railing. She looked up at him from her chair, heart pounding. It's an opportunity. One I can't ignore, but it feels like giving up everything we've built here. Giving up you. Her voice trembled slightly, carried by the soft morning breeze. He took a deep breath, stepping closer. Isabel, whatever you choose, I'll stand by it. But I need you to know something. I'm not just here because I'm supposed to be. I'm here because I choose you every day. Not pity, not duty. But because I want to build a life with you, strong and real, no matter what the world throws at us. Double quotes. Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she stayed grounded in her chair, letting his words sink in. He was offering her something she had feared she'd never have again. Unwavering trust and love that didn't depend on ability, wealth, or social standing. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, Vikasa continued, voice steady, eyes locked on hers. I only know today, and today I want you here. With me, not because you're broken, not because I feel obliged. Because this life, this cabin, this land, it's ours. You and me. Together. Her fingers tightened around the letter, crumpling it slightly. She folded it slowly and tucked it into her bag while keeping her seat, a symbol of the steadiness she had gained. I choose this, she whispered, voice strong now. I choose us, here, with you. Relief and joy washed over Vikasa. He knelt briefly beside her chair, careful and grounding, letting her feel the solid weight of his presence. For a long moment, the wind carried away the remnants of doubt, leaving only the quiet certainty that they had found home in each other. Later that day, Vikasa led her chair gently across the prairie, each step a declaration, each glance a promise. Hands intertwined, Isabel steady in her seat, they moved together, eyes on the horizon. Vikasa glanced down at her and smiled a slow, unguarded smile full of warmth and gratitude. "You know," he said, "we've been through fire and rain, and somehow we're still standing." She laughed softly from her chair, the sound carrying across the open field. "Better than standing. We're thriving." The sun dipped low, painting the sky in gold and amber. In that light, the prairie seemed to stretch endlessly before them, a world full of possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them side by side, hearts aligned, unbroken, and unafraid. Together, they returned to the cabin, Isabel still seated in her chair, steady and strong, knowing the past had forged them, the present had bound them, and the future would be theirs to shape, fearless, free, and side by side. The morning sun spilled over the prairie, gold and warm, as if blessing the life native man Vikasa and Isabel had chosen together. The cabin stood quiet, sturdy, its wooden frame bathed in the soft light, a testament to the days and nights they had poured into it. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of pine, leather, and the lingering warmth of the fire they had tended the night before. Isabel sat by the window in her chair, her hands working carefully through her ledger, organizing supplies and notes for their small store. Her face was calm, yet radiant, reflecting the pride of regained independence and a life reclaimed. Vikasa leaned in the doorway, watching her for a long moment. The worry, fear, and shame that had once clouded his eyes were gone. In their place shone a quiet strength and a love that needed no words. "Morning," Isabel said softly, glancing up from her chair, a small smile curving her lips. "Morning," Vikasa replied, voice low but steady. He stepped closer, taking her hand gently as she remained seated. "You slept well?" She nodded, settling back in her chair. "Better than I have in years. I feel alive." He smiled, squeezing her hand. "That's the life you deserve. And we're going to keep building it every day." Outside, Dusty stirred in her stall, shaking her mane. The horses, the land, the prairie itself, they all seemed to celebrate this quiet triumph. Vikasa moved around her, tending to chores while she remained in her chair, the steady anchor of their shared life. The cabin, once a shelter for one man's grief, had become a home for two souls who had dared to hope. Later, as the afternoon stretched on, Vikasa built a small sign over the store entrance, etched carefully with the words, "Isabel and Vikasa, goods for the brave, by the brave." Isabel, seated in her chair by the porch, reached out to brush the letters, her hands steady and confident. Vikasa watched her, heart swelling with pride. They had carved a life from dust and sweat, fear and courage, and it was theirs completely, unapologetically. Evening fell slowly. The sky blazed with deep oranges and purples, reflecting in Isabel's green eyes as she leaned back in her chair, a warm blanket draped across her shoulders. Vikasa rested his arm on the chair's back, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath, a quiet reminder that they had survived storms far greater than any weather. "You know," Isabel said, voice soft, "I never thought I'd have a life like this again, a life that feels ours, safe, yes, but also full. Full of possibilities, full of hope." Vikasa tilted his head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We made it ours. Together, and that's just the beginning." As night fell, lanterns flickered around the cabin. Stars glittered above, vast and endless, and Vikasa gently guided her chair to the porch, adjusting it so she could see the horizon, the hills, the sky stretching infinitely. Her laughter carried on the wind, a sound so pure it seemed to heal the land itself. "You've lifted me higher than anyone ever has," she whispered, eyes shining. "And I always will," he replied, steady and sure. "To the sky, Isabel. To the life we choose, the love we built, and the freedom we earned." They watched the stars together, she in her chair, he standing close, hands entwined, hearts aligned. Outside, the prairie slept under the soft glow of moonlight, the world quieted, safe, and whole. Inside, two souls who had been broken by fate and fire now stood unshaken, their love a beacon in the untamed wilderness. And in that moment, The story of Vikasa and Isabel was complete not because the world had given them peace but because they had chosen it for themselves together. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying their laughter, their courage, their promise, that even from ashes, hearts could rise, and love could thrive, strong and unbroken, forever free.